of the biggest issues that I hear from people when it comes to their diet and their health is how do they trust different sources of information? What makes one source valid and another uncredible? Why is it that some of this information may not have all the peer-reviewed, double-blind, backed-up studies that some of the pharmaceuticals out there propose to have? And it's an interesting conversation because on one end, we want to trust the validity and the research and the structure of science, but we want to make sure that it's objective and it's beneficial science. It's not corporately funded scientific research that's not really scientific, and it's actually just very biased, and it's usually just a segment of some kind of study that a company or corporation will use as a marketing pitch to promote their product and say, hey, look, studies say that it does X, Y, and Z. Right? That's really important to understand, is that a lot of the scientific proclamations out there are actually just clever marketing, and you're not getting the whole story, right? So when it comes to how to organize your lifestyle, how to organize your diet, there's a number of ways I go about it. I don't just go with double-blind, peer-reviewed research. Like, I don't just go on PubMed and just like look up studies and like, okay, well now I know reishi mushroom is good for me to take. Now I know that cacao is good for me. Now I know that it's safe to take maca. Now I know it's safe to drink 1 liter of spring water every day, right? There's so much conflicting information out there, and I have to tell you, this was one of my pet peeves, getting into the whole litany and the whole minutia of natural nutrition, is that I kept seeing all these different perspectives, all these different interpretations, all these different frames of reference, and the way that people were approaching the information and how they shared information online. It was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's a lot of conflictions, a lot of almost controversy over very simple things. So my head was spinning. I can imagine a lot of you, like, your head is spinning. There's so much information. What do we do with it? And how do I know if something is credible? This is how I choose to approach it. And actually, it's funny because just recently I was listening to a podcast interview from my friend David Wolf, who's one of the most respected and definitely one of the most brilliant nutritionists walking this planet right now. And he was asked a very similar question, actually. And he was asked, how do you go about that? How do you know if something is credible or not? And how do you approach it? And he had the same exact answer that I actually have. I just hadn't thought about it that way until I heard it. And it was basically that, if everything lines up, if something has research behind it, whether it's animal studies, it's human studies, it has, what else? I'm trying to think of an example. What else? It has some kind of, maybe a channeler. There's channeled information like Bashar or Abraham Hicks or something is validating that, like, hey, look, chocolate is the best thing ever. Like, chocolate will save the planet. Chocolate is, that's the thing, right? As an example, or green vegetable juice. I was listening to Bashar. I do get into the channeled information because I tend to think actually appropriate and really like real good channeled information is actually most of the time more accurate and more straight to the point than a lot of the other stuff that we get from the whatever medium that we're getting information from. It's usually through the bias of some human channel, and it's not channeled by a non-biased entity, if that makes sense. Okay, anyway, so the point is, I was listening to Bashar, and he was actually going through a rundown of the most important things that humanity needs to do right now to be healthy. And it was like 7 things, and it was just, everything was just so practical, and to me it was just like verification. Like, oh my God, thank you. Basically what he was saying is that you need to eat food in its raw state. It's uncooked, unprocessed, ungenetically modified, uncontaminated, uncooked state. right? Like raw food. This is channeled information. And then also we need to breathe. We need to create more carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. We need to breathe and get more oxygen. It's like, oh wow, okay. And a number of other things showed up in that. In detoxification, cleansing out all the toxins in the world. That was another thing that showed up. I was like, whoa. Okay, that's interesting. So how do you navigate it? So basically, me and David are kind of on point here with saying that if everything in your life lines up synchronistically, then that thing is a go. If there's research behind it, if there's anecdotal evidence, if possibly, if you get it through channeled information, and if it synchronistically shows up in your life, then it's a go. And then that's your green light moving forward with that thing. And I've found over the years that has been the most on-point barometer that I could use for how to navigate through this whole thing, because I get information all the time and it sounds really good. I'm like, okay, I could really use that, but then I kind of hold off. Like, okay, well, let me see if this shows up again for me. Because if it shows up again through some kind of synchronistic way, some kind of serendipitous way, then I know, like, okay, this is coming into my frame of reference for a reason. I want to talk about this real quick too, because as we're rounding out this entire course, I think this is such an important concept for all of us to think about and to meditate on and to observe how our life is actually orchestrated, not in a linear, mathematical 1, 2, 3, 4 straightforward way, but it's actually orchestrated in a riddle, metaphorical, sacred, geometrical way, right? Everything is geometrically progressing based on serendipitous coincidences that show up in our life. It's actually, if we're paying attention to these messages that show up, these signposts, it actually guides us to more advantageous and effective routes to travel than trying to just go like, okay, I'm going to design my diet this way, I'm going to eat A, B, C, D, I'm going to have this in my salad, it's going to be all, whatever. You're too cerebral and trying to like mathematically control the situation. We let go a little bit. We know based on the menu board of the universe, these options are available. We point them all out and then we just see what shows up for us. Now, I love this idea of synchronicity because this has been the guiding ship in my life and how I actually make decisions. I don't make decisions entirely on rationality. Right, I actually see like, is this going to show up in my life? Because if this is the direction I'm supposed to go, if this is what my destiny is, then it's gonna create a fork in the road. It's going to show me, it's going to actually rub me a certain way where I know without a shadow of a doubt, without my cognitive bias, that this is the direction I'm supposed to go. The word synchronicity was coined by Carl Jung. And he was a student of Freud, right? And you may have read David Wilcock's Synchronicity Key and all that stuff. Basically, it was the idea that the universe is wrapped up in a series of coincidences. We might call that serendipity. And we now, in our kind of world, we call that synchronicity. When things synchronistically align up that you couldn't have predicted, you couldn't have anticipated, it just shows up and it wafts you with this experience that there is magic in the world, that we do live in an enchanted reality, and that actually everything is not dominated by the mundane and logical mind. Okay, so what does all that have to do with how to navigate the health riddle? Well, it is a riddle. And so approaching it from a riddled state of consciousness, in my opinion, is more effective for ease, for grace, for opening up to the magic, for enhancing healing processes in the body that happen through decreasing cortisol, from reducing stressful inflammatory responses in the body, loosening up on the stranglehold, the control mechanism that we have on how things have to be. We loosen up, we get a little more into the grace, and we open up to the serendipitous events that are streamlining into our reality day by day. And this is not just a great way to approach the nutrition and health puzzle, this is a great way to approach life. I found is instead of me trying to plan out everything, it's like I go into the flow. I do everything I can to tap myself into the holy flow of hyper synchronicity. When hyper states of synchronicity just start becoming a normality, it's like then you know you're being divinely guided. And that is my personal form of spirituality. It's not a brick and mortar church. It's actually when things flow into my life, I know that I'm on the right track and I know I'm being guided by a higher power. So that in a nutshell is my philosophy and my overall feeling on this whole how to navigate the health equation.